What are dreams made of? Are they spun from the golden threads of destiny, or are they merely fragile whispers, carried away by the winds of reality? Some dreams are born from ambition, others from longing, and a few, just a few, are written in the stars, waiting for the right moment to unfold. Zawadi had once believed in dreams. As a child, she had listened to her grandmother's stories of the great Mivulai Palace, the towering gates of ivory, the endless corridors of polished stone, the golden chandeliers that flickered like captured sunlight. But the palace was not just a place of beauty, it had once been a part of her family's story. Her grandmother had served there long ago, when their name held meaning in the royal court. But fate had a cruel way of shifting tides. A huge political scandal had changed the hands of power, and with it, their family had lost favor. The corridors they had once walked became forbidden halls. The name they had once carried with pride faded into the whispers of the past. Now, Zawadi's world was the marketplace, where she helped her mother sell mangoes and papayas. Here, names did not carry weight. Only the sharpness of a bargain and the clinking of coins mattered. The palace, once a childhood dream, had become nothing more than a distant tale. But fate, like a river finding its way back to the sea, had not forgotten her. Far beyond the marketplace, in the heart of the kingdom, ruled Queen Tasha, a queen of quiet wisdom. She was not a ruler who sought to be feared, nor one who indulged in mere luxury. She understood that true power was not the weight of a crown, but the lives it could change. And so, on her birthday every year, she stepped beyond the palace walls, disguised as a noblewoman, and entered the marketplace. She would buy a single item from a single merchant, and with that purchase, she would change a life. The chosen trader would wake the next morning to find their fortunes reversed. The woman who had once woven mats by the roadside was now a supplier for the royal chambers. The man who had once sold spices from a wooden crate now owned a shop, his name carried across the kingdom. The woman who once sold fabrics now styled most of the nobles in the kingdom. These traders didn't know how it all happened, but their lives simply transformed. And with that birthed the legend of the woman who was never seen twice. No one knew who she was. Some believed she was a wealthy traveler, others a merchant seeking rare goods. But one thing was certain, she was a woman of destiny, and those she chose were never the same again. But as years passed, the marketplace changed. The traders became watchful, no longer selling what they knew best, but what they thought she would buy. If she had once purchased salt, the next year, the market overflowed with barrels of it. If she had bought silk, suddenly every vendor became a tailor. Yet, since it all was a one-day show, there wasn't really any cause for serious worry. You would think these traders had now developed an artful spine that made them resourceful, thoughtful enough to sell the goods that they suspected this mysterious woman would want. But the reality was that greed had seeped into generosity's shadow. However, generosity had always been the queen's silent vow. A tradition, yes, but also a promise she had made to herself. A promise she was no longer sure she had kept. It had happened a year ago, on the same day she had chosen last year's fortunate trader. She had been riding back to the palace in disguise, feeling the quiet satisfaction of having changed yet another life. But then she had seen something that made her stop in her tracks. A beggar, frail and trembling, sat just outside the market. His hands were outstretched to the very woman she had just made rich. "Please, just a little food," the man had pleaded. The woman barely looked at him before turning away, self-absorbed by her own success. Really? Nothing? The queen had just filled her baskets with enough gold to feed 10 families. And yet, her heart had not changed. That moment haunted the queen. Had she been blind? Had she mistaken greed for gratitude? Had she, in her attempt to spread kindness, only rewarded those who already knew how to take? She had built a tradition that she believed lifted her people. But if kindness could not be passed down, then what had she truly built? That night, as the lanterns burned low in the palace, the queen made a decision. This year, she would not be fooled by eager hands and expectant faces. This year, she would reward someone who had already proven themselves worthy without knowing they were being watched. At dawn, an old woman shuffled into the marketplace, her clothes worn, her back bent with age. Dust clung to her skin, her feet cracked from the journey. She was a figure most traders would rather not see. Poverty was bad luck, and today was too important a day for misfortune. The vendors had spent months preparing, curating their stalls in anticipation of the mysterious woman who would bring them fortune. They had watched every noblewoman who passed, their eyes sharp, their voices sweetened with politeness. But this old woman was not wealth. She was not prosperity. And so, one by one, they dismissed her. "This is not the one," they muttered. "She will bring bad luck," others whispered. The old woman moved from stall to stall, pausing by baskets of fruit, fingers hovering over fabrics she dared not touch. She did not beg, she only looked. And no one offered her anything. But fate, always watchful, had its own plans. Zawadi was in the market that morning, not as a trader, but as a daughter fulfilling a duty. Her mother had fallen ill the night before, unable to open her stall. But she owed a debt, and so Zawadi had come to repay it. As she stepped away from the vendor's stall, her mother's coins still warm in her palm, she noticed the old woman standing alone, her gaze lingering over a pile of ripe mangoes. The same mangoes her mother would have sold had she been well. Zawadi hesitated only for a moment before reaching for a mango from her mother's stall and pressing it into the woman's hands. "Here," she said simply. "Only if my mother were here, she would have given you more." The old woman looked at her, truly looked at her. And in that gaze, there was something Zawadi could not place, something deep and knowing, as if fate itself had just smiled. That night, an invitation arrived at her doorstep. A royal summons, sealed with the emblem of the queen. The woman she had given the mango to was no ordinary beggar. She was a messenger from the queen herself. And Zawadi, without knowing it, had just stepped into her own destiny. The palace gates, once a distant dream, opened before her. Zawadi stepped inside, her heart hammering in her chest. The golden chandeliers, the polished stone, the endless corridors, it was all as her grandmother had described, and yet, it was real. The queen welcomed her, not as a trader, not as a servant, but as someone worthy of standing beside her. "You have a kind heart," the queen said, "and in this world, kindness is more valuable than gold." Zawadi became more than a market girl that day. If only for a night, she became part of the palace, her wisdom valued, her presence treasured. Zawadi left the palace the next morning with assurance from the queen that she could come back anytime. Her grandmother's story had not been a forgotten tale. It had been a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. As the years passed, the legend of the woman who was never seen twice lived on. But now, the people understood, wealth was not just in gold, but in the heart. And so, the traders learned a lesson written long before their time. The hand that gives will never be empty. For fate does not reward the cleverest nor the strongest, but the kindest. And those who give without expectation will find that, one day, the world will give back to them in ways they never imagined.